Okay, guys, I was looking through my videos and saw that I have not made a video about logical switches when it comes to AS3X and safe receivers and how to get more than 3 flight modes. So I've created this model named 4 Plus Gyro flight modes. So the first thing, I guess, well, let me get into what I'm going to do is insert a picture here and I'm going to show you what we're aiming for. Okay, here's what we're wanting. We need 100% on the flight mode channel for flight mode 1, 0% for 2, minus 100 for flight mode 3, 125% for flight mode 4, which is kind of odd, and then 75 for 5 and 50% for 6. And you can see that they've used plus and minus 25, plus and minus 50, and plus and minus 75. So they had to put something on 125 because they've used plus and minus 100 naturally and 0. So anyway, for some reason, they put flight mode 4 at 125%. So you have to do some you have to do some setup to get 125 out of the radio. But I'm going to show you how to do that. So let me go back to the transmitter. Okay, so under model setup, we go to logical switch setup. And logical switch number 1 is the one we'll use. And I use switch A and switch C. And A is a 2-position switch and C is a 3-position. So that gives us a 2x3 matrix. And we can set these cells, essentially, to anything between 1 and 5, or 0 and 5, excuse me. Or we can set the top row. If I move the switch,
FM2, FM3,
we could make all 3 of these 0 and then have 3 different flight modes here. In other words, if all of these are 0, we could set that for AS3X off and safe off. And then we flip the switch the other
FM4,
way. Then we could have AS3X and we could have
FM5,
envelope mode. And in 5, we could have safe mode.
FM6.
So you can have anywhere from 4 to 6 different flight modes, depending on how you pick these numbers. And then I name this logical switch gyro modes. Now, to get the percent for each one of these, let's go back to 0.
FM1.
And it says FM1 because it's FM1 through 6. But if you remember from the image I showed a while ago, 0 is 100%.
FM2.
And 1 is, or FM2 is 0.
FM3.
And then 3 is minus 100. And then we flip the A switch.
FM4.
And that's 125 for 4.
FM5.
And 5 is 75.
FM6.
And 6 is 50, just like that chart showed. So this is all set up. You have to change these values for each one of these blocks as you go through them.
FM1.
All right, so that's that. And then you've got to assign that logical switch to a channel to control the receiver's flight modes, the gyro. And if it's a 6-channel receiver, you want to use channel 7. If you have that many channels on your transmitter, don't use, well, you could use channel 5 if you're not using it for gear, but if you got something you want to plug into the port for channel 5, then you need to use channel 7 through 20 because the receiver can hear 7 through 20. And so I've got the gyro mode's logical switch for channel 7, and I've got the rotary knob for channel 8 for gain. And I haven't changed the RX port assignment. There's no need to. And you can see it says gyro on 7 and gain on 8. So that needs to be like that. And the audio events, I just set up the gyro mode switch to say FM 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, what you would really do is set these to something that makes sense, like gyro off, or envelope, or safe mode, or hand launch, or whatever you're going to use these 6 flight modes for. So that lets you know what the switches are going to do. And then go to model adjust and go to servo setup. And I name the channels for what they do. That's why it was showing us gyro and gain. So if you name your channels before you do much setup, it makes it much easier to know what these channels are going to do, because aux2 may not mean anything to you, and aux3 may not mean anything. So if you name them, then it's easy to choose the right channel when you're going through the flight mode setup and forward programming. So I think that's pretty much it. So let's go to forward programming and go into gyro settings and flight mode setup. Before that, let's see, there's a place we need to go, and I think it's under utilities, and enable flight modes. If you're going to use more than 3, this defaults to 3. And why it says flight mode 3, I don't know, because the field says flight mode. It's not just flight mode 6, it's 6 total flight modes, but that's the way they did it. So anyway, we've got it set for the right number of flight modes because that's how many I set up on the logical switch. I left this out originally, but I need to go back and show you how I set up the flight mode channel and the gain channel. So when you name the channel gyro or gain, it's real easy to go through the channels and pick the right one. Instead of looking for aux2 or aux3, you go by the name that you gave it. And the switch is already set because I set the switch in the channel assign. So that's all there is to setting the flight mode channel. And then to pick the gain channel, we go back to system setup and gain channel select, and we go to gain channel 1. And here again, you pick the channel by the name you gave it. And so you click on gain and normal and AS3X, and you want this set to all so that it adjusts roll, pitch, and yaw at the same time. Now, if you really want to work on one axis at a time, you can set this to just one at a time, but generally, if you set the gains to the default of 40, 50, and 60, then you can leave this set to all and let the gain adjust all 3 together, and they will increase and decrease proportionally. So anyway, that's all you do to set up the gain channel. So now we go into flight mode setup, and we're in flight mode 1, and nothing is turned on. Let's see if anything is over here. All right, hand launch is inhibited. All right, so let's go to flight mode 2.
FM2.
And it says FM2, and I've got AS3X active, everything else is off. And we'll check the hand launch, and it's inhibited. And then
FM3.
flight mode 3, I've got safe mode, angle demand, and I've got low throttle to pitch enabled, because that's what I use. I don't use the high one because I don't want my airplanes to climb in safe mode. And AS3X has to be on if safe is on. And then hand launch is not turned on this flight mode. So let's go flip a switch to get to flight mode 4.
FM4.
And now AS3X is active because envelope is active. And look at hand launch, and it's inhibited, so we're not using it in flight mode 4. And then let's go to 5.
FM5.
And 5 is safe angle demand, and I've got high and low enabled just to be different. And hand launch is disabled. And now let's go to flight mode 6.
FM6.
All right, so AS3X is active. Safe is not active, and it probably should be, I guess, because I've got hand launch active. I've never really used hand launch. I don't have a plane that needs it. But anyway, you can set these 6 flight modes up any way you want to. You can change the audio announcement to where it says what the flight mode actually does instead of FM 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because that's not very informative. And so anyway, I guess that is pretty much it. There was something else I wanted to say. And of course, after you do any changes to the servo, travel, and transmitter, sub-trim, reversing, you need to click Relearn Servo Settings and make sure it says All, and then Complete, and it's done. And then you need to get out of forward programming before you attempt to fly the airplane, because it may not write everything to the receiver until you get out of forward programming. You don't want to unplug the airplane while you're in this menu, or turn the throttle back on and fly with the screen up. You need to be out of the screen when you're done. And I see a lot of confusion about something. You do not have to use the transmitter's flight modes to control the receiver's flight modes. They are 2 totally separate things. And it's really better to use the transmitter's flight modes for flaps, and normally switch D is for flaps. And so now you got 3 positions, and what I do is I change the name if switch D is up. So this would be, if I can type, flaps up, and then go to the middle position.
Flight mode 2.
And that is takeoff flaps. And then we go to the down
Flight
position.
mode 3.
And this is landing flaps. So now when I flip the switch,
Flaps up.
it says flaps up,
Takeoff flaps.
takeoff flaps,
Landing flaps.
and landing flaps. So don't use the transmitter's flight modes to control the receiver. This is a much better use for them. And the other thing that flight modes gives you is flight mode trim, because you can set these to F mode, and now you have separate trims on the standard aileron and elevator trim levers, trim switches, for each position of the flaps. And the transmitter will remember these trims, because you want to trim the airplane to fly level with the flaps up, and then you want to trim it where it glides with takeoff flaps deployed, and you want to trim it to where it glides with full flaps without stalling. And using flight mode trim lets you trim the elevator while you're flying in the air, instead of having to do the guessing game in the flap system menu, which if I go to it, it's not there because the wing type is not set to one aileron, one flap, or something similar to where the transmitter knows that you have flaps. And then if you go into model adjust, now you got the flap system. So now you're going to put this on flight modes because you're using, you put the flap switch on the flight modes. And so now when you move switch D,
flaps up, takeoff, landing flaps.
See, now you're
flaps
controlling
up.
your flaps. And ordinarily, I set flaps up to 100. And I set flaps, landing flaps to plus 100. And then I set these to about minus 25. So this gives you flaps up, and this is takeoff flaps, which is about 1/3 of full flaps, and then this is full flaps. And I don't have to use these trims and play the guessing game on my elevator trim with the flaps down. I can use the trim levers. Now, once I figure out what the trim levers need to be set to, I can go over here and I can look and see which position am I in. I'm going to takeoff flaps. See, as I move the trim, I see that this says, I'll do it one more time where it says 8. Okay, that says 8. So what I need to do is change this to where it says 16. And do it with this, it's easier. And now when I center the trim, there, it says 8 with the trim centered. So you can transfer the elevator position to here and center the trim. And you can still trim it in the air because you still got flight mode trim, but your trims are going to be starting out from 0, and you can move them either way a little bit if you need to, if you want to change the way it glides. So anyway, there is using a logical switch for the receiver's flight modes and using the flight modes on the transmitter to control the flaps and the elevator trim. So there you go. Hope that helps, and we'll see y'all later.